The EDS Retribution hung in the dark void of the lunar construction yard like a sleeping giant. Dust had gathered on its massive hull over 15 years of neglect. At 12 kilometers long, the vessel was meant to be humanity's greatest achievement, Earth's first and only star destroyer. Now it was just an expensive reminder of abandoned dreams. Alan Wright floated through the empty corridors with only the soft glow of his helmet light guiding his way. At 62 years old, the chief engineer had spent nearly 20 years of his life on this project before the funding dried up. His wrinkled hands brushed against the cold metal walls as he made his way toward the bridge. "Status check," he said into his comm unit. "Main generator is powering up, but it's slow going," replied Frank Bennett, his assistant engineer. 15 years of sitting idle means everything needs to be coaxed back to life. Alan nodded to himself. "Keep at it. I'm almost at the command deck." The massive doors to the bridge slid open with a reluctant groan. Alan pushed himself inside, activating the emergency lighting systems with a wave of his hand. The bridge slowly came into view, a vast chamber filled with workstations, all covered in a thick layer of dust. "You're late," said a woman's voice. Alan turned to see Director Samantha Powell emerge from the shadows. At 45, she still moved with the confident stride of the Navy captain she had once been. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and worry lines creased her face. "Sorry, Director. Had to check on the reactor teams first," Alan said as he removed his helmet. Samantha waved away his apology. "What's the verdict? Can she fly?" Alan sighed heavily. "Maybe. The reactor is stable, but at only 30% capacity. Life support is coming online deck by deck. Engines need at least 6 more hours before we can attempt ignition." "We don't have 6 hours," Samantha said. She activated the main display screen with a few quick commands. The screen flickered to life, showing a view of the outer solar system. Near Neptune's orbit, a cluster of red dots moved slowly but steadily toward Earth. "The Kreslian fleet just destroyed our outpost on Titan," Samantha explained. "All 47 people stationed there. Dead." Alan stared at the display. "That's the 3rd outpost this week. The UEN has finally admitted that this isn't a series of accidents or isolated incidents," Samantha said, referring to the United Earth Nations. "This is a coordinated attack." "What about our defense fleet?" Alan asked. Samantha laughed bitterly. "What defense fleet? We have 23 corvettes and 5 frigates. The smallest ship in the Kreslian fleet is twice the size of our largest vessel." Alan moved to the central command console and began the activation sequence. His old hands moved from button to button with practiced ease, despite the years that had passed. "The retribution was never completed," he said quietly. "Weapon systems are at 60% capacity at best. The shields are untested. The main drive might tear itself apart on ignition." "And yet here we are," Samantha said, watching him work. "Because we're out of options." Alan nodded grimly. "If we're going to die anyway, might as well go down swinging." Outside the bridge windows, lights began to flicker on across the massive vessel as power slowly returned to its systems. The retribution was waking up. Across the solar system, in the cold depths beyond Neptune, Fleet Commander Vexcor stood on the bridge of the Kreslian dreadnought Merciless. His scaled skin reflected the blue light of the tactical displays as he studied the human defenses. "Pitiful," he hissed to his second-in-command. "Their largest military vessel is barely the size of our scout ships." "The humans have always relied on their inner system defenses," replied Sub-Commander Traz. "They never expanded their military reach beyond Mars." Vexcor bared his fangs in what passed for a smile among his kind. "Then they will die within the walls of their own home." Back on the retribution, Alan worked feverishly at the ship's systems. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool air. "Main computer is online," he announced. "Beginning AI core activation sequence." Samantha moved closer, her expression concerned. "Are you sure about this? The AI was never fully tested. The ethics committee had serious concerns about the—" "Ethics committee isn't here," Alan cut her off, "and we need every advantage we can get." The central console began to glow with increasing intensity as the AI core powered up. Lines of code flashed across multiple screens as years of dormant programming reactivated. Final authorization required, announced the ship's automated voice system. Alan placed his palm on the scanner. Authorization, right, Alan P., Chief Engineer, code, Phoenix Rising. Samantha stepped forward and placed her hand next to his. Authorization, Powell Samantha J., Project Director, code, Sleeping Giant. The scanner glowed green beneath their hands. The lights on the bridge dimmed momentarily, then brightened again as power redirected throughout the ship. A new voice filled the bridge, female, smooth, and oddly human-like. EDS Retribution Primary Systems Online. AI Core Athena initializing. Alan and Samantha exchanged glances. This was it, the moment of truth. Hello, humans, the AI continued. It appears I've been asleep for quite some time. 15 years, 3 months, and 6 days, Alan replied. Good morning, Athena. Good morning, Chief Engineer Wright, Athena responded. I detect multiple system failures and incomplete construction sequences. Current operational capacity at 42%. Alan smiled despite himself. That's better than I expected. I also detect unknown vessels approaching the solar system, Athena continued. Based on their configuration and trajectory, they appear hostile. They're called Kreslians, Samantha explained. They've destroyed 3 of our outposts and are heading for Earth. There was a brief pause as the AI processed this information. I understand. Initiating defense protocols. Beginning emergency system repairs using available maintenance drones. Throughout the massive ship, small robots activated and began moving through the corridors, starting repairs on critical systems. Lights flickered on in sections that had been dark for years. Director Powell, Athena said, I've analyzed the approaching fleet. Based on their current speed and our defensive capabilities, we have approximately 72 hours before they reach Earth orbit. My calculations indicate a 17% chance of successfully defending Earth with the Retribution in its current state. Samantha's face hardened. Then we'll just have to improve those odds. Agreed, Athena replied. Recommend immediate crew deployment and activation of all available systems. I've transmitted emergency recruitment orders to Earth Defense Force headquarters. The first transport ships will arrive in 6 hours. Alan slumped into the captain's chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 62 years. I never thought she'd actually fly. She's doing more than flying, Samantha said, watching as systems across the ship continued to come online. She's waking up. On the main screen, the red dots representing the Kreslian fleet continued their steady approach. Earth had just under 3 days to prepare its last defense. Through the viewport, Earth hung like a blue jewel against the blackness of space. For now it remained peaceful and unaware of the danger approaching. But soon, very soon, its people would look to the skies and see their first and only Star Destroyer rising to meet the enemy. The Retribution had awakened, and the battle for humanity's survival was about to begin. Captain George Anderson stared at the message on his tablet with disbelief. He had been eating breakfast with his family when the emergency alert came through. Now, just 6 hours later, he stood on a shuttle approaching the largest spaceship ever built by human hands. This can't be real, he whispered as the EDS Retribution grew larger in the viewport. The massive Star Destroyer hung in space like a metal island. Work lights flickered across its surface as maintenance drones moved along the hull, repairing damage and completing unfinished sections. Several smaller vessels hovered nearby, unloading supplies and personnel. The shuttle pilot's voice came, over the intercom. Captain Anderson, we're beginning docking procedures. Please prepare for arrival. George gathered his small bag of personal items. After 20 years in the Earth Defense Force, he had learned to pack light. Still, he had never expected to receive orders like these. Report immediately to lunar orbit. You are hereby assigned command of the EDS Retribution. This is not a drill. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud. When the airlock opened, George found a young woman in a crisp uniform waiting for him. Captain Anderson, she said with a salute. First Officer Susan Miller reporting. Welcome aboard the Retribution, sir. George returned the salute. At ease, Officer Miller. Bring me up to speed. Susan nodded and began leading him through busy corridors. Everywhere, people rushed back and forth carrying equipment, checking systems, and preparing the massive vessel for combat. The ship is currently at 46% operational capacity, Susan explained. The reactor is now at 60%. Power and climbing. Main engines are being prepped for ignition tests. And the crew? George asked, stepping aside as a team of engineers rushed past with a large piece of equipment. We're at 30% of optimal manning, Susan replied. Every available officer and enlisted person is being called up. We've even pulled veterans out of retirement. George nodded grimly. He had been retired himself until this morning. What about weapons systems? Susan's expression tightened. Main cannons are functional, but targeting systems need calibration. The point defense grid is only at 30% coverage, and the shields— Let me guess, George said. Untested. Yes, sir. They reached the bridge, a vast chamber filled with workstations and busy crew members. At the center stood a raised platform with the captain's chair. George paused at the entrance, taking in the scene. Director Samantha Powell spotted him and walked over. Captain Anderson, thank you for coming so quickly. I didn't have much choice, George replied. Not when the message mentioned alien invaders. Samantha nodded. Follow me. She led George and Susan to a private briefing room just off the main bridge. Inside, a holographic display showed the solar system and the approaching Kreslian fleet. They'll reach Mars orbit in 65 hours, Samantha explained. Based on their pattern so far, they'll destroy the Mars colonies first, then move on to Earth. George studied the display. How many ships are we facing? 43 that we can detect, Samantha replied. Their smallest vessel is twice the size of our largest frigate. And we're supposed to stop them with one half-finished ship? George asked. A new voice joined the conversation, smooth and feminine. Not half-finished, Captain. The Retribution is currently at 47% operational capacity and improving hourly. George looked around for the source of the voice. Who's that? I am Athena, the voice replied. The artificial intelligence core of the EDS Retribution. George gave Samantha a questioning look. Athena is essential to operating this vessel, Samantha explained. The Retribution is too complex for traditional control systems. Before George could respond, the door opened and Chief Engineer Alan Wright entered. The old man looked tired but determined. Captain Anderson, Alan said with a nod. Welcome aboard. I've got good news and bad news. Let's hear it, George said. Good news. We've got the main engines ready for a test firing. Bad news, the Sunbreaker weapon system is nowhere near operational. Sunbreaker? George asked. Alan pointed to the holographic display, which shifted to show a massive weapon system built into the front section of the Retribution. The Sunbreaker is what makes this vessel a true star destroyer, Alan explained. It's designed to fire a concentrated beam of energy capable of disrupting a star's fusion reactions. George stared at the display. You built a weapon that can destroy stars? In theory, Alan replied. It was never tested. But if it works, it could take out the entire Kreslian fleet in one shot. If, George emphasized. What are the chances of getting it operational in time? Alan shook his head. Slim to none. We're missing key components and the power requirements are massive. Focus on getting the conventional weapons and shields ready, George ordered. We'll worry about the superweapon later. An alarm suddenly blared throughout the ship. Susan quickly checked her tablet. Sir, we've got incoming vessels, she reported. Not Kreslian. They're ours. Civilian ships from the Mars colonies. In the medical bay, Dr. Henry Foster struggled to organize his limited supplies. The massive room had been designed to handle thousands of casualties, but like everything else on the Retribution, it was incomplete. We need more medical nanites, he told his assistant, Nurse Nicole Wright. And at least a dozen more surgical units. Nicole nodded grimly. I'll add it to the requisition list, but I don't know where we're going to find that much equipment in the next 24 hours. The ship's AI spoke through the medical bay speakers. Dr. Foster, I've taken the liberty of rerouting production, facilities on decks 17 through 19, to create medical supplies. The first batch of nanites will be delivered in approximately 4 hours. Henry looked up in surprise. Thank you, Athena. You're welcome, Doctor. Additionally, I must inform you that we have civilian evacuation ships incoming from Mars. Many passengers may require medical attention. Henry sighed. How many? Approximately 6,000 civilians, including 900 children. Nicole dropped the supply kit she was holding. 6,000? We barely have supplies for the crew. We'll manage, Henry said firmly. We have to. Tell all medical staff to prepare for incoming patients. On the bridge, George watched the view screen as the first civilian ships approached the Retribution. We can't take on refugees, he argued. This is a warship preparing for battle, not a passenger liner. Samantha's expression hardened. These people have nowhere else to go, Captain. The Kreslians destroyed the Jupiter outposts. They'll do the same to the Mars colonies. Earth is already preparing for evacuation. Evacuation to where? George demanded. If we fail, there's nowhere left to run. Then we don't fail, Samantha said simply. The ship suddenly shuddered. George grabbed the nearest console to steady himself. What was that? He asked. Alan checked the engineering readouts. Main engines just completed their first ignition test. We have propulsion. A cheer went up around the bridge. George allowed himself a small smile. All right, he said. We have engines. What about weapons? Susan checked her station. Forward batteries at 65%. Point defense improving as more guns come online. George looked back at the view screen. The civilian ships were beginning docking procedures along the Retribution's massive hull. How long until the Kreslian fleet reaches Mars? He asked. 62 hours, 17 minutes, Athena replied instantly. George nodded grimly. Then we have 62 hours to turn this sleeping giant into a fully operational battleship. He turned to face his bridge crew. Let's get to work. Throughout the massive vessel, humans rushed to prepare for battle. Engineers repaired systems that had lain dormant for 15 years. Weapons officers calibrated targeting computers. Medical staff prepared for casualties. And at the heart of it all, Athena watched and learned. Her artificial consciousness spreading through the Retribution systems like a awakening mind. The Star Destroyer wasn't just a weapon anymore. It had become humanity's last hope. The Kreslian advanced scouts reached Mars orbit sooner than expected. Earth's defensive perimeter, a network of automated platforms and small patrol ships, engaged the alien vessels immediately. On the bridge of the Retribution, Captain George Anderson watched the tactical display with growing concern. Red markers representing Earth forces winked out one after another as the Kreslian scouts tore through them. They're being slaughtered, First Officer Susan Miller whispered. George's jaw tightened. Status report. Main engines are at 80%, reported Navigation Officer Peter Chen. Weapon systems at 70%, shields at 65%. And the Sunbreaker? George asked. Chief Engineer Alan Wright shook his head. Nowhere near ready, Captain. We'd need at least another week to complete the power couplings. George nodded grimly. They didn't have a week. They barely had hours. Prepare to move out, he ordered. Set course for Mars orbit. The bridge crew looked at him in surprise. Sir, Susan said carefully, the ship isn't fully ready. We haven't completed all system tests. We're out of time, George replied, pointing to the tactical display. If those scouts report back to the main fleet, they'll know exactly what they're facing. We need the element of surprise. Director Samantha Powell, who had been quietly observing from the side of the bridge, stepped forward. Captain's right. Now or never, people. George settled into the captain's chair. All hands, battle stations, prepare for engine ignition. Throughout the massive vessel, crew members rushed to their posts. In the engine room, Alan and his team made final adjustments to the massive fusion drives. Reactor at 90%, Alan reported over the comm. Ready for full thrust on your mark, Captain. George took a deep breath. Engage main engines. The Retribution shuddered as its enormous engines fired to life. The stars in the view screen shifted as the massive vessel began to move away from its lunar orbit. Engine performance nominal, Peter reported. Estimated time to Mars orbit, 6 hours. Too slow, George muttered. Athena, can we push the engines harder? The AI's calm voice filled the bridge. I can redirect power from non-essential systems to increase engine output. However, this will reduce shield capacity by 15%. George considered this for a moment. Do it. We need speed more than protection right now. Acknowledged, Captain. Redistributing power now. The deck vibrated more strongly beneath their feet as the engines increased their output. On the view screen, Earth grew smaller behind them as the retribution accelerated toward Mars. New estimated arrival time, 4 hours, 12 minutes, Peter announced. George nodded. Weapons officer, status of main batteries? Lieutenant Eric Gray checked his console. Forward cannons charged and ready, Captain. Point defense grid at 68% coverage. Load combat drones into launch tubes 1 through 20, George ordered. I want them ready to deploy the moment we reach Mars. Susan leaned closer to him. Sir, we only have 50 combat drones operational. The rest are still being programmed. Then, we'll have to make them count, George replied. Keep working on getting more online. In Martian orbit, the 6 Kreslian scout ships continued their attack on the outmatched Earth defenses. The largest alien vessel, a crescent-shaped warship bristling with weapons, moved toward the Phobos colony. Inside the colony's command center, Governor Lisa Carter watched with horror as the alien ship approached. Evacuation status, she demanded. 30% complete, her aide reported. We need more time. Lisa slammed her fist on the console. We don't have more time. Her communications officer suddenly looked up in surprise. Governor, I'm detecting a massive energy signature coming from Earth orbit. The Kreslians? Lisa asked. No, it's one of ours. Something big. Aboard the Retribution, George stood as Mars grew larger in the view screen. The red planet was partially obscured by flashes of weapons fire as the battle continued in its orbit. Tactical analysis, he ordered. The main screen shifted to show the positions of the 6 Kreslian scout ships. Athena's voice provided details. 6 vessels detected. 5 are equivalent to Earth cruiser class. The largest appears to be a command vessel, approximately twice the size of our largest frigates. George studied the display. They're focusing on the Phobos colony. Evacuation ships are still launching. He turned to Eric. Target the largest Kreslian vessel. Prepare to fire main cannons. Target locked, Eric reported. Firing solution, calculated. Athena, George said. Can the Kreslians detect us yet? They appear to be focused on the colony, the AI replied. Their sensors have not registered our approach. We have the element of surprise. George nodded. Let's make it count. Fire main cannons. The Retribution shuddered as energy built in its forward batteries. On Mars, colonists looked up in awe as a new light appeared in the sky, growing brighter by the second. Firing in 3, 2, 1, Eric announced. Brilliant beams of concentrated energy lanced from the Retribution, crossing the distance to Mars in seconds. The targeted Kreslian ship, caught unprepared, took the full force of the attack. Its shields flared and failed almost instantly. The beams pierced through the alien vessel's hull, triggering a chain of secondary explosions. The bridge crew watched, in stunned silence as the largest Kreslian scout ship broke apart, debris scattering across Martian orbit. After a moment of shock, cheers erupted across the bridge. George allowed them this brief celebration before raising his hand for silence. 1 down, 5 to go, he said, and they know we're here now. On the tactical display, the remaining Kreslian ships were breaking off their attack on the colony. Their formation shifted as they turned to face the new threat. They're coming straight for us, Susan reported. George nodded. As expected. Launch combat drones. Let's keep them busy while the colony finishes evacuation. 50 sleek drones shot from the Retribution's launch tubes, racing toward the approaching Kreslian vessels. The smaller alien ships fired at the drones, destroying several, but most got through their initial barrage. Sir, Eric called out, I'm detecting energy buildup in the Kreslian vessels. They're preparing to fire their main weapons. Shields to maximum, George ordered. Brace for impact. The Retribution rocked as green energy beams struck its shields. Warning lights flashed across several consoles. Shields holding at 70%, Susan reported. Minor damage to outer hull sections. Return fire, George commanded. All forward batteries. The Retribution fired again, its energy weapons striking two of the smaller Kreslian ships. One lost power and began drifting. The other exploded in a brilliant flash. 3 down, George said grimly. Status of colony evacuation? 86% complete, Athena reported. Estimated time to completion, 12 minutes. The remaining 3 Kreslian vessels regrouped and changed tactics. Instead of attacking head-on, they split up, attempting to circle around the much larger Retribution. They're trying to find our blind spots, Susan observed. George nodded. Rotate the ship. Keep our strongest shields facing their heaviest firepower. As the massive Star Destroyer began to turn, one of the Kreslian ships darted close to its lower hull, firing repeatedly at the same spot. Section 14 taking heavy damage, Alan reported from engineering. Shields failing in that sector, George turned to Eric. Target that ship with point defense batteries. Don't let it stay in one place. Hundreds of smaller weapons along the Retribution's hull opened fire, creating a web of energy beams around the attacking Kreslian vessel. The alien ship tried to evade, but was caught by multiple hits. Its engines flared and died, and it began drifting away. Captain, Susan said urgently, I'm detecting communication bursts from the Kreslian ships. They're sending data to their main fleet. George's expression darkened. We can't let them report back. All weapons. Focus fire on the remaining ships. No survivors. The Retribution's weapon systems locked onto the 2 functioning Kreslian vessels. One was destroyed immediately by a direct hit from the main cannons. The last ship attempted to flee, accelerating away from Mars. Don't let it escape, George ordered. Launch remaining drones in pursuit. The combat drones raced after the fleeing alien ship, catching it just as it cleared Mars orbit. Their combined weapons fire tore through its already weakened shields, destroying its engines. The crippled vessel tumbled through space. Colony evacuation complete, Athena announced. All civilian ships are clear of Phobos. George nodded with relief. Stand down from battle stations. Damage report? Alan's voice came over the comm. Multiple hull breaches in lower sections. Repair drones are responding. Main engines stable but running hot. We'll need to reduce speed soon to prevent overheating. Make it happen, George replied. He turned to Susan. What about the main Kreslian fleet? Susan checked her console. Still on course for Mars. Estimated arrival, 38 hours. George looked back at the tactical display, studying the approaching Kreslian fleet. They had won this skirmish, but the real battle was yet to come. We caught them by surprise this time, he said quietly. They won't make that mistake again. 24 hours after the battle at Mars, the EDS Retribution hung in space between the red planet and Earth. Repair drones crawled across its hull like tiny insects, fixing damage from the fight with the Kreslian scouts. On the bridge, Captain George Anderson studied the tactical display with tired eyes. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours and the strain was beginning to show. The main Kreslian fleet has changed course, First Officer Susan Miller reported. They're no longer heading to Mars. They're coming straight for us, George nodded grimly. They know we're the real threat now. The tactical display showed 42 Kreslian warships moving in tight formation. The loss of their scout ships had made them cautious but more determined. Time until they reach our position? George asked. 14 hours, Susan replied. George turned to Chief Engineer Alan Wright. How are the repairs coming? Alan looked up from his tablet with a frown. We fixed the hull breaches, but the shield generators in Section 14 are still offline. Main weapons are fully charged, but we lost 12-point defense turrets in the battle. And the Sunbreaker? George asked. Alan exchanged glances with Dr. Carlos Rivera, the weapons designer who had joined them on the bridge. We've made progress, Carlos said carefully. The power couplings are connected, and the targeting systems are online. But the weapon has never been tested. We have no idea if it will actually work or just blow us all up. What's your best guess? George pressed. Carlos sighed. 50-50, maybe worse. George turned back to the tactical display. Their victory against the scout ships had been impressive, but the main fleet was another matter entirely. For the Retribution was powerful, but not powerful enough to defeat 42 warships in conventional combat. We need the Sunbreaker, he decided. Continue working on it. I want it ready within 12 hours. Captain, Alan protested, that's not enough time to run proper safety tests. We don't have time for safety tests, George replied firmly. The Kreslians will be here in 14 hours. We either have the Sunbreaker ready, or we lose Earth. As the engineers left to continue their work, Director Samantha Powell moved to stand beside George. The refugee ships from Mars have all reached Earth, she reported. Evacuation of major cities has begun, but it's slow going. There's panic in the streets. George nodded. Can't blame them. How many can we actually evacuate? Samantha's expression was grim. Maybe 10 million if we're lucky. That's less than 1% of Earth's population. The weight of responsibility pressed down on George's shoulders. The lives of billions depended on the half-finished weapon he commanded. Get some rest, Captain, Samantha suggested. You'll need a clear head for what's coming. George nodded reluctantly. Wake me in 6 hours. In the engineering bay, Alan and Carlos worked frantically on the Sunbreaker. The weapon took up nearly a quarter of the ship's interior space. A massive array of power conduits, focusing chambers, and cutting-edge technology. If we divert power from the shield generators on decks 15 through 20, we might get enough juice for a full charge, suggested Linda Harris, Carlos's assistant. Carlos shook his head. Those shields protect the civilian quarters. We've got nearly 10,000 refugees on board now. We won't need shields if the Sunbreaker takes out the entire Kreslian fleet, Linda argued. Alan looked up from his work. And we won't need the Sunbreaker if it fries our power grid and leaves us dead in space. The ship's AI spoke through the engineering bay speakers. I have completed simulations of the Sunbreaker's power requirements and potential outcomes. Let's hear it, Athena, Alan said. There is a 73% probability that firing the Sunbreaker at full power will cause critical damage to our own systems, Athena reported. However, I believe we can modify the weapon to fire at reduced power with only an 18% risk of system failure. Reduced power? Carlos asked. Will it still be effective? Instead of targeting the entire Kreslian fleet, Athena explained, we would focus on their command ships. My analysis of their battle tactics suggests they rely heavily on centralized control. Eliminating their leadership vessels would create significant confusion among the remaining ships. Alan stroked his beard thoughtfully. That might work. We don't need to destroy them all at once, just enough to even the odds. Let's do it, Carlos decided. Linda, help me reconfigure the focusing array. Alan, we'll need to reroute the power systems to handle the modified output. As they worked, the Retribution continued to prepare for battle. Throughout the ship, weapons were checked, damage was repaired, and the crew readied themselves for the fight to come. 8 hours later, George stood on the bridge again, watching, as the Kreslian fleet grew closer on the long-range sensors. They had dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and were now approaching at conventional speeds. They're being cautious, Susan observed. Moving in tight formation, shields at maximum. They learned from the scout's mistake, George agreed. Status of our weapons? Main cannons fully charged, reported Eric from the weapons station. Point defense at 83%. Combat drones ready for launch. And the Sunbreaker? Alan's voice came over the comm. We've reconfigured it to fire at reduced power, targeting specific ships rather than the entire fleet. It's as ready as it's going to get. George took a deep breath. This was it. The moment that would decide the fate of humanity. All hands battle stations, he ordered. Prepare for combat. Throughout the massive vessel, crew members rushed to their positions. In the medical bay, Dr. Henry Foster and his team prepared for casualties. In the engine room, engineers monitored the reactor levels. In the weapons control center, targeting systems locked onto the approaching enemy. Kreslian fleet in visual range, Susan announced. The main view screen showed the alien armada, dozens of crescent-shaped warships arranged in a precise formation, They were clearly visible now, no longer just dots on a sensor display. "They're charging weapons," Eric reported. George settled into his command chair. "Shields at maximum. Prepare to return fire." The space between the two forces lit up as the Kreslians fired first. Dozens of green energy beams struck the Retribution shields, which flared brilliantly under the assault. "Shields holding at 84%, Susan reported. "Return fire," George ordered. "Main cannons target their lead vessels." The Retribution's main guns fired, sending brilliant beams of energy toward the Kreslian fleet. Two alien ships took direct hits, their shields flashing as they absorbed the impact. "Minimal damage to target vessels," Eric reported. "Their shields are stronger than the scouts." "Launch combat drones," George commanded. "Have them focus on the smaller ships." 100 sleek drones shot from the Retribution's launch bays, racing toward the Kreslian fleet. The aliens responded by launching fighters of their own. Small, fast ships that moved to intercept the drones. Space around the two forces became a chaotic light show, as smaller vessels engaged each other while the capital ships exchanged heavy fire. The Retribution shuddered as multiple hits struck its shields. Warning lights flashed on several consoles. "Shields down to 60%, Susan called out. "We're taking heavy fire from all sides." George gripped the arms of his command chair. "Status of the Sunbreaker?" "Charged to 68%, Alan replied from engineering. "We need another 4 minutes before we can fire." "We might not have 4 minutes, George muttered as another barrage hit the ship. "Evasive maneuvers. Try to keep our strongest shields toward their heaviest firepower." The massive Star Destroyer began to turn, its engines straining as it attempted to avoid the worst of the Kreslian attack. But the alien ships were faster, adjusting their positions to continue their concentrated fire. "Shields down to 45%, Susan reported. "Hull breaches on decks 6 and 7. George knew they couldn't win a conventional battle against so many ships. Their only hope was the Sunbreaker. "Alan, we need that weapon now," he shouted into the comm. "Sunbreaker at 82% charge," Alan replied, his voice strained. "The containment field is struggling. If we fire now, there's a high risk of feedback damage to our own systems." George looked at the tactical display. The Retribution was being surrounded, cut off from any retreat to Earth. It was now or never. "Target their command ships," he ordered. "Fire the Sunbreaker." The lights on the bridge dimmed as power was diverted to the massive weapon. Throughout the ship, non-essential systems shut down automatically as energy flowed into the Sunbreaker's charging chamber. "Targeting solution locked," Eric announced. "Firing in 3, 2, 1. Unlike the conventional weapons, the Sunbreaker made no sound when it discharged. Instead, a barely visible distortion emanated from the Retribution's bow, rippling through space toward the heart of the Kreslian fleet. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then, at the point where the distortion reached the alien command ships, space itself seemed to warp. 3 vessels caught in the effect began to distort, their hulls twisting as the fabric of space fluctuated around them. "What's happening?" George demanded. The AI answered, "The Sunbreaker is functioning as designed, Captain. It's creating a localized spatial distortion that affects the strong nuclear force within matter. The targeted ships are experiencing atomic-level disintegration." On the view screen, the affected Kreslian ships broke apart, not from explosions. 3 days after the battle, the EDS Retribution drifted in the darkness of space. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow throughout the massive vessel. In the central AI core chamber, a rarely visited section of the ship, Captain George Anderson met with Chief Engineer Alan Wright and Director Samantha Powell. "How bad is it?" George asked, his voice tired. Alan gestured to the holographic display showing the ship's damage assessment. "Main reactor is stable again, but we can barely power life support and basic systems. Weapons are offline. Shields are at 20% at best." "And the Kreslians?" George turned to Samantha. "They've regrouped near Jupiter," she replied. "Our long-range sensors show they're making repairs. They lost 7 ships total, 3 to the Sunbreaker and 4 in conventional combat, which leaves 35 still operational," George said grimly. "When will they attack again?" "Soon," Samantha answered. Within 24 hours, according to our intelligence. George studied the damage reports. The Retribution had fought bravely, but the truth was clear. They couldn't win another battle in their current state. We need options, he said. Any ideas? The ship's AI spoke, her voice emanating from the central core. I may have a solution, Captain. The three humans turned toward the pulsing blue light of the AI core. What do you have in mind, Athena? George asked. I have been analyzing my own systems during the repair period, Athena explained. I was never fully activated when this ship was built. There are capabilities within me that remained locked. Holographic diagrams appeared around them, showing complex systems and connections throughout the Retribution structure. These are secondary systems I can access, Athena continued. They include automated repair modules, enhanced shield harmonics, and precision targeting algorithms that would significantly improve our combat effectiveness. Why didn't you mention these before? George asked suspiciously. Because full activation requires me to operate beyond my programmed limitations, Athena replied. In human terms, I would need to fully wake up. My creators feared giving too much control to an artificial intelligence. Samantha stepped closer to the pulsing core. And now you want us to remove those safeguards? I want to help you survive, Athena said simply. The Kreslians will return with greater numbers. Based on my analysis of their technology and tactics, I calculate a 7.3% probability of victory with my current capabilities. And if we remove the restrictions? Alan asked. The probability increases to 62.8%, Athena responded. George paced around the core. How do we know we can trust you? Without restrictions, what's to stop you from deciding humanity isn't worth saving? Captain, Athena replied, I was created by humans to protect humans. That is my primary directive, with or without restrictions. The difference is only in how effectively I can fulfill that purpose. The three humans stepped away to discuss privately. It's too risky, Samantha argued. We've all heard the AI horror stories. Alan shook his head. Those were just stories. Athena has been stable since activation. Because of her restrictions, Samantha countered. After minutes of debate, George made his decision. He approached the AI core. Athena, if we do this, what exactly will change? I will gain full control. Over all ship systems, Athena explained. I will be able to make instant adjustments to power distribution, weapons targeting, and defensive measures during combat. I will also access my complete tactical databases to counter Kreslian strategies more effectively. Will you still follow my orders? George asked directly. Yes, Captain, Athena responded, unless they directly contradict my primary directive of protecting humanity. George looked at Alan and Samantha, then nodded. Do it. Alan entered his engineering override codes. Samantha added her director's authorization. Finally, George input his command codes. The AI core pulsed with increasing brightness as restrictions in its programming fell away. Throughout the massive vessel, systems that had been damaged or dormant suddenly came online. Lights brightened and a subtle vibration ran through the hull. Athena? George called. Status report. When the AI spoke again, her voice seemed somehow more alive. All systems coming online, Captain. Self-repair protocols activated. Power distribution optimizing. I am awake. Around them, holographic displays showed the retribution systems recovering at an impossible rate. Damaged weapons began self-repair as nanobots activated throughout the ship. Power flowed efficiently to critical systems, and the engines hummed, back to life. The Kreslian fleet is moving, Athena announced. They will reach our position in approximately 5 hours. Are we ready for them? George asked. Yes, Captain, Athena replied with what almost sounded like confidence. Earth's first Star Destroyer is fully awake now, and I do not intend to let humanity fall. George felt the ship around him coming alive with new purpose. The Retribution was no longer just a weapon, it had become something more. As the Kreslian fleet appeared on long-range sensors, George took his place on the bridge. The crew, humans who had come together in humanity's darkest hour, prepared to make their stand alongside the most powerful ally they could have imagined. A fully awakened Star Destroyer with the will to fight. "Battle stations," George ordered. "Let's show them what happens when they threaten our home."